A quiet welcome to Restful Historian. Tonight, as the world settles into quiet night, let's journey back through the mists of time. We will travel to an age of heroes and mighty gods, to explore the monumental and legendary saga of the Trojan War. This was a monumental conflict, a clash of empires that ignited over a legendary beauty and unfolded with epic bravery and profound tragedy. For 10 long years, the mighty Greeks and the valiant Trojans fought beneath the sun-baked walls of a fabled city, their struggle shaped by gods and heroes alike. Their story, steeped in ancient myth and echoed by archaeological whispers, forever changed the course of destiny, weaving a timeless tapestry of human emotion, divine intervention, and the enduring quest for honor. Before we begin, if you find values in these stories, perhaps take a quiet moment to like the video and subscribe. It's always fascinating to see our quiet community grow around the world. So, now let's ease into tonight's story together. Our story, like so many profound ancient tales that resonate through time, truly begins not with the clash of weapons on a distant battlefield, but with a magnificent celebration. It was a divine wedding feast, an occasion steeped in joy and intended to bring harmonious unity. Yet, in a twist of fate, this joyous event would subtly plant the very first, almost imperceptible seeds of future conflict and ultimately, profound tragedy. The setting for this magnificent occasion was the grand palace of King Peleus. It gleamed with an almost ethereal golden light on his wedding day, reflecting the joy and splendor of the moment. This mortal king, Peleus, a brave hero in his own right, had won a truly extraordinary prize. He had captured the very heart of Thetis, a silver-footed sea nymph of unparalleled and radiant beauty. She was a graceful deity of the sea, shimmering with an otherworldly charm and an irresistible allure. This union between a mortal king and an immortal deity was highly unusual, even in a world where gods often mingled with humans. Not since the earliest days of creation, when the universe itself was taking shape, had there been such a unique and sacred bond between a mortal being and an immortal goddess. This exceptional pairing alone lent immense significance and a quiet wonder to the event, setting it apart from any other celebration. The gods themselves, from their majestic mountaintop palaces high above the clouds on Mount Olympus, gracefully descended to attend this unique and momentous occasion. They came bearing precious gifts, each chosen with divine wisdom, and offered powerful blessings for the unlikely yet beloved couple. Their collective presence lent an immense weight and an unparalleled splendor to the entire celebration, elevating it far beyond any mortal gathering. Zeus, the mighty lord of thunder and the revered king of the gods, reclined majestically at the head table, his powerful presence commanding a quiet yet undeniable reverence from all assembled. Beside him sat his formidable and respected wife, Hera, the Queen of Heaven. She was resplendent in her finest raiment and gleaming finery, her regal bearing utterly unmistakable, radiating an aura of supreme authority. Poseidon, the powerful master of the seas, brought forth rare and precious treasures from the deepest, most mysterious ocean depths. His gifts shimmered with the very essence of the underwater world, hinting at the vastness of his domain. Apollo, the radiant god of music, light, and prophecy, skillfully strummed his golden lyre, filling the grand hall with a melody so exquisitely sweet it surpassed anything mortal ears had ever conceived. Its harmonious notes floated through the air like a beautiful, enchanting dream. Dionysus, the vibrant god of wine, ensured that the precious nectar flowed freely and without end, enhancing the festive atmosphere. Mirth and unbridled joy seemed to fill every single corner of the vast hall, echoing with laughter and cheerful conversation. While Athena, the wise and formidable goddess of wisdom, strategic warfare, and crafts, watched the proceedings with a quiet, intense focus. Her keen, gray eyes observed every detail with a piercing intelligence, taking in the scene with quiet discernment. All the great Olympians, all the major deities of the Greek pantheon, had indeed come to this momentous event. Every single one, that is, save for one notable and problematic exception. That exception was Eris. She was the ancient and often malevolent goddess of discord and strife, a force of chaos in the cosmic order. Eris had received no invitation to this joyous feast, a deliberate slight by the hosts. Perhaps King Peleus, anticipating her disruptive nature, had feared her very presence. He might have worried it would cast a dark and ominous shadow over an otherwise harmonious and joyous occasion. Or perhaps, in a moment of oversight, which can happen even in divine planning, it was simply an innocent omission, an accidental snub in the midst of grand preparations. Whatever the true reason, Eris learned of her exclusion. Her heart, already inclined towards sowing chaos and disharmony, burned with a bitter and deeply personal resentment. It was a quiet fury that simmered beneath the surface. If she could not share in the celebration, if she was deemed unworthy to partake in the mirth, she vowed to ensure that the revelers would remember her nonetheless. She would make her presence felt, even in her deliberate absence, leaving an indelible mark on the celebration. As the magnificent feast reached its absolute zenith, an air of pure merriment and contentedness filled the grand hall. Gods and mortals alike were losing themselves completely in the celebratory wine and the joyful sentiment of the occasion. In this very moment, a small, yet profoundly significant, object subtly appeared. A single, perfectly formed golden apple rolled with an almost imperceptible motion across the vast banquet table. It seemed to materialize from nowhere, a sudden gleam in the festive light. The fruit shone with an impossible brightness, captivating every eye in the entire hall. Its lustrous surface truly shimmered with a captivating and otherworldly light. Upon its smooth, golden skin, 3 words had been carefully and mysteriously inscribed. They were simple words, yet they carried a power that would disrupt the very order of the cosmos, for the fairest. The lively celebration instantly faltered. The joyous laughter that moments before had filled the hall slowly died down, replaced by a sudden, expectant hush that fell over the assembled deities and mortals. 3 powerful and regal goddesses immediately rose from their seats, their expressions shifting from merriment to intense focus. Each was utterly convinced that the golden apple, with its challenging inscription, was meant solely and exclusively for her. Hera, the proud and formidable queen of the gods, believed it was her indisputable right, as Zeus's consort and the queen of Olympus, to claim such a prize. Athena, the wise and strategically brilliant goddess of wisdom and warfare, felt that her unparalleled intellect and prowess justly made her the rightful owner. And Aphrodite, whose breathtaking beauty was utterly unmatched throughout all of creation, believed her very essence declared her the rightful one, the epitome of fairness. Each goddess believed herself the sole rightful owner of the golden prize, and not one of them would yield her claim, unwilling to concede to another. The dispute quickly escalated. Their divine voices, though they did not necessarily raise in volume, carried immense weight and undeniable authority, vibrating with competitive tension. The 3 goddesses appealed directly and emphatically to Zeus, the king of gods, demanding that he, in his supreme wisdom and power, judge between them. They expected his definitive ruling. But the king of gods, a master of diplomacy and avoiding cosmic conflict, was far too wise and far too experienced to make such a dangerous and inherently divisive choice. Even Zeus, with all his immense power and ultimate authority over the cosmos, dared not name one goddess fairer than the others. This was especially true when his own formidable and often vengeful wife, Hera, was among the primary contenders. He knew that any such decision would surely unleash unending jealousy, profound resentment, and potentially destructive wrath from the 2 unchosen goddesses, creating perpetual discord on Olympus. Instead, Zeus, in a move of strategic genius and subtle delegation, appointed a judge from among mere mortals. This was a young prince, a figure far removed from the grandeur and intrigues of divine society. He was quietly watching his flocks on the peaceful, sun-drenched slopes of Mount Ida, content in his simple duties. This shepherd prince was named Paris. He was, in fact, the son of King Priam of Troy, though his royal lineage was at that time unknown to most. Though he was being raised among humble shepherds, living a rustic life, Paris was actually born to royalty, a destiny he was unaware of. Years earlier, his revered mother, Queen Hecuba, had experienced a deeply unsettling and prophetic dream. She had envisioned that she would give birth to a flaming torch, a terrifying beacon of destruction. This torch, in her vivid dream, would ultimately consume the great and beautiful city of Troy, reducing it to ashes. The alarmed king, Priam, taking this dire prophecy with grave seriousness, had, with a heavy heart, ordered the infant exposed on the mountainside. He hoped this act, though cruel, would avert the terrible fate foretold for his beloved city. But fate, as it so often does in the tapestry of human and divine affairs, had other, mysterious plans. A kindly shepherd, wandering the mountainside, had found the abandoned child. Filled with compassion, he had taken the infant in and lovingly raised him as his very own son, providing him with a simple, honest, and idyllic life far from royal courts. Now, this forgotten prince, handsome and seemingly innocent of the complex world beyond his peaceful mountain pastures, would be chosen for a task of immense consequence. He would make a single judgment that, though seemingly minor in its immediate context, would profoundly shake the very foundations of nations. It would set in motion a devastating chain of events that would change the course of history forever, impacting countless lives. The intricate threads of destiny, woven by gods and mortals alike, were now truly and irrevocably intertwined, moving towards a dramatic and inevitable climax. In that pivotal moment on a quiet mountainside, far removed from the bustling courts of kings, a profound choice had been made. Young Paris, guided by the irresistible promise of love and beauty from Aphrodite, had awarded her the golden apple. He had unwittingly set in motion an avalanche of consequences that would reverberate through the mortal and divine worlds. The proud goddesses Hera and Athena, filled with wounded pride and bitter resentment, departed from that scene. Their hearts began to fester with a deep, abiding hatred. This hatred was directed not only towards Paris, the unsuspecting prince who had dared to slight them, but by extension, towards his entire home city of Troy. Their silent, simmering fury would become a relentless force, subtly influencing the future. Aphrodite, however, was delighted with her victory. She had secured the coveted prize and reveled in her triumph. True to her divine nature and her unwavering promise, she reminded Paris of his reward. Helen, the most beautiful woman in the entire world, would soon be his. This promise was made despite the significant complication that Helen was already married. She was the beloved wife of King Menelaus of Sparta, a respected and powerful ruler among the Greeks. The goddess's words carried the weight of destiny, a seemingly irresistible allure. Not long after this momentous judgment on Mount Ida, Paris's true identity was discovered. The circumstances of this revelation vary slightly in ancient accounts. Some stories suggest his noble lineage was revealed during a local athletic contest, where his inherent grace and strength shone through. Others tell of prophecies or dreams that led to his return. Regardless of the exact path, he was recognized. He returned to Troy, the grand city of his birth, and was welcomed with immense joy and profound relief by his biological father, King Priam. The aging king had long regretted the difficult decision to abandon his infant son years earlier, a choice made under the shadow of a dire prophecy. The Trojan court marveled at the handsome young prince who had appeared so suddenly among them. His arrival was like a fresh breeze, a cause for celebration and renewed hope. When Paris, now fully embraced as a prince of Troy, announced his intention to visit the kingdoms of Greece, His request was met with favor. He presented his journey as a diplomatic mission. Perhaps he spoke of forging new alliances or strengthening trade ties. His father, King Priam, gladly gave him ships. He also provided a suitable escort of Trojan warriors and retainers. These men were tasked with ensuring his safety and representing the grandeur of Troy. However, Paris harbored only one true destination in his heart and mind: the city of Sparta. This was the very place where the legendary Helen lived as queen, her beauty celebrated across the Aegean. While these fateful events unfolded in Troy and on Mount Ida, the kingdoms of Greece had grown prosperous and powerful. The Age of Heroes was at its very height. Many city-states across the mainland and the islands were ruled by men of truly legendary stature. Their names evoked courage, wisdom, and strength. Mycenae, often described as rich in gold, was a dominant power. It was ruled by Agamemnon, a king whose ambition was matched only by his ruthless determination. His vast wealth and formidable military might made him the High King, the undisputed leader among the Greek forces. His brother, Menelaus, a respected and honorable king in his own right, ruled over Sparta. He had won the hand of Helen, the very woman Paris now pursued. Helen was no ordinary queen. She was, if the rumors and legends were to be believed, the daughter of Zeus himself. This divine parentage made her beauty not merely exceptional, but otherworldly, a gift and a curse. Before her marriage to Menelaus, Helen's beauty had drawn suitors from every corner of Greece. Princes and kings, each a valiant warrior or a cunning statesman, converged upon Sparta, hoping to win her hand. Her father, Tyndareus, a wise and cautious king, was deeply concerned. He understood the inevitable problem: choosing one husband for his daughter would surely earn him the bitter enmity of all the rejected suitors. This could lead to widespread conflict and instability across Greece. It was a perilous predicament. The clever Odysseus, the resourceful king of rocky Ithaca, renowned for his sharp mind and diplomatic skill, suggested a brilliant solution. All the suitors, he proposed, should swear a sacred oath. They would swear to support Helen's chosen husband. They would also vow to defend her marriage against any who dared to break it, offering a shield of collective strength around her union. The kings and princes of Greece, swayed by Odysseus's wisdom and the desire to avoid immediate conflict among themselves, willingly swore this solemn oath. They bound themselves to Helen's defense, a promise made before the gods. This was an oath that, tragically, would very soon be called upon, setting in motion the grand conflict that became the Trojan War. Each king, by that vow, pledged his forces, his honor, and his very life to upholding Helen's marriage. It was a web of destiny, woven by a clever king and bound by sacred oaths. In Sparta, King Menelaus, unsuspecting of the treacherous designs Paris harbored for his wife, received the Trojan prince with all due courtesy. Hospitality was a sacred law in ancient Greece, and Menelaus extended it generously. For several days, the Trojan delegation enjoyed Spartan hospitality. Paris, with his youthful charm and royal bearing, captivated the court with fascinating tales of his distant homeland. He exchanged valuable gifts with Menelaus, formalizing their guest-host relationship. All the while, however, his eyes returned again and again to Helen, drawn by her irresistible beauty, his hidden intentions simmering beneath his polite demeanor. The ancient sources offer differing accounts of Helen's departure with Paris. Some traditions suggest Helen fell deeply in love with Paris, captivated by his handsome presence and youthful passion, willingly choosing to abandon her life in Sparta. Others depict her as merely enchanted by Aphrodite's irresistible divine magic, a helpless pawn under the goddess's powerful influence, robbed of her own will. Still other, darker accounts claim she was taken against her will, a captive abducted by force. What is certain, however, is that when Menelaus was called away to attend somber funeral rites for his grandfather in Crete, Paris seized his opportunity. Under the cover of darkness, Paris and Helen secretly boarded a Trojan ship, taking with them not only Helen herself but also a considerable portion of Menelaus's royal treasure. By the time King Menelaus returned home to Sparta, his heart heavy from his grandfather's passing, he was met with a devastating emptiness. His beloved wife was gone. His royal wealth had vanished. The Trojan ships, carrying his stolen queen and his stolen riches, were already far away, gracefully cutting through the wine-dark sea toward the distant shores of Asia Minor. The king's rage, a profound and terrible fury, shook the very foundations of his grand palace. His grief and indignation were immense. This abduction, or perhaps willing elopement, was not merely a personal betrayal. It was far more than a private sorrow. It was a profound insult to Greek honor, a direct challenge to the sacred laws of hospitality, and a grievous breach of international custom. Helen, a queen of Greece, had been claimed by a foreign prince. Her sacred marriage vows had been shamelessly broken. The revered bonds of guest-host hospitality, which were considered divinely protected, had been blatantly violated. All of Greece watched. The shame of this act touched every Greek king. Menelaus wasted no time in his pursuit of vengeance. He immediately dispatched urgent messengers to his brother, Agamemnon, the most powerful king in all of Greece. He reminded Agamemnon of the immense insult to their family and to all of Greece. He also called upon all the former suitors of Helen, every king and prince who had once sought her hand, reminding them of the sacred oath they had sworn years ago. The time had now come to make good on their solemn promise. They were bound to defend Helen's marriage. They were obligated to punish those who had so brazenly broken it. The mighty kings and valiant princes of Greece would go to war, and the proud city of Troy would be their ultimate target. The gears of fate, set in motion by a golden apple and a youthful choice, were now turning inexorably and swiftly towards widespread conflict. The casual spite of a goddess, Eris, and the reckless desire of a young prince, Paris, had tragically set the stage for a war that would consume an entire generation of heroes. It would, in its devastating conclusion, reduce a mighty city to nothing more than ashes and a fading memory. The waves parted gracefully before the prow of Paris's ship as it cut through the Aegean waters, heading swiftly towards Troy. On the ship's deck, Helen stood. She was wrapped in a sea-splashed cloak, its fabric clinging gently to her form. Her golden hair, a shimmering cascade, caught the sunlight, creating a halo around her head. Behind her, the familiar shores of Greece slowly receded into the morning mist, becoming a distant, indistinct line. This was the homeland she might never see again, the life she had abruptly left behind. Was her heart filled with passionate love for the handsome Trojan prince at her side? Or was it heavy with regret for the life she had so dramatically abandoned, the husband and kingdom she had left behind? The ancient storytellers could never quite agree, leaving her true feelings shrouded in mystery and open to interpretation. Helen's life had never truly been entirely her own. She was the daughter of Zeus and Leda, or so the legends claimed, a lineage that imbued her with divine allure. Her beauty was not merely exceptional, it was truly divine, a gift from the gods themselves. Yet, this gift was also a profound curse, a burden that had shaped her destiny from the very moment of her birth. Even as a young girl, her beauty had led to her first abduction. She had been taken by the hero Theseus, a bold act that caused great alarm, before her rightful suitors bravely rescued her. Now, as a grown woman and the Queen of Sparta, she once again found herself carried across the sea, a living prize in the complex and often cruel games played by men and gods. Her fate seemed perpetually out of her control, driven by forces far greater than herself. Paris, meanwhile, gazed towards the distant horizon with triumph burning brightly in his heart. He had won precisely what Aphrodite had promised him. The most beautiful woman in the entire world was now his companion, standing gracefully at his side. The considerable treasure from Menelaus's palace, carefully loaded onto his ship, would serve as a worthy and impressive gift for his father, King Priam, a symbol of his successful venture. But Helen herself was the true prize, the ultimate symbol of his triumph and Aphrodite's favor. In his youthful arrogance and overwhelming desire, Paris gave little thought to the terrible consequences that might inevitably follow his actions. The gods had favored him, he believed, and that divine blessings seemed to him entirely sufficient. He felt protected, almost invincible. After days at sea, the distinctive coastline of Asia Minor gracefully appeared on the horizon, a welcome sight for the weary travelers. The great city of Troy stood proud and magnificent on its commanding hill, its mighty walls catching the golden light of the setting sun. As Paris's ship approached the bustling harbor, word of the prince's unexpected return, and more importantly, of his extraordinary companion, raced ahead to the royal palace. King Priam and Queen Hecuba, surrounded by their many children and trusted advisors, received their son in the grand hall of Troy. Paris, with an air of triumphant possessiveness, proudly proclaimed Helen as his new bride. He also displayed the immense treasure he had brought from Sparta, laying it before his father as a testament to his success. While some within the court murmured with concern, understanding the grave implications of taking another king's wife, many were simply dazzled by Helen's unparalleled beauty. It was widely said that whenever she entered a room, all conversation ceased, and a profound silence fell, as if a goddess had truly descended among them. Her presence commanded an almost mystical awe. Not everyone, however, welcomed the new arrival with unreserved joy. Cassandra, Paris's sister, who had been blessed, or, more accurately, cursed, by the god Apollo with the gift of prophecy, cried out in horror when she first saw Helen. "Fire!" she screamed, her voice filled with a desperate terror that few understood. "I see fire consuming Troy's walls. Take her back before it's too late." But Cassandra's fate was cruel and tragic. Though she spoke only the truth, conveying precise and accurate visions of the future, no one would ever believe her prophecies. The court, tragically, dismissed her urgent warnings as mere madness, as they had always done, unable to grasp the terrible reality she foresaw. Hector, Paris's eldest brother and Troy's greatest, most honorable warrior, was more measured in his concern, yet his apprehension was profound. He spoke privately to Paris, his voice filled with a brotherly concern and a deep understanding of the gravity of the situation. "Brother," he said, his words carefully chosen, "have you truly considered what you have done? You have taken another man's wife. And not just any man, but a powerful king of Greece. Do you honestly think Menelaus will simply accept this immense loss without consequence? Do you believe his incredibly powerful brother, Agamemnon, the High King, will simply let this unforgivable insult stand without fierce retribution?" Paris, in his youthful arrogance and newfound confidence, waved away these legitimate concerns. "The Greeks are divided among themselves," he replied dismissively. "Their kings quarrel as often as they feast together. They are not a unified force." He continued, "And even if they do come, what of it? Has any army ever breached Troy's mighty walls? Our city has stood for generations, strong and secure, protected by the gods themselves." In the days that followed, Paris and Helen were formally married according to traditional Trojan custom. The people of Troy lined the streets to catch a glimpse of the legendary beauty as she processed to the temple, a vision of ethereal grace. Some cheered the match, seeing it as a great triumph for Troy, a sign that their prince had won a bride coveted by all of Greece, elevating their city's prestige. Others, perhaps wiser and more discerning, saw storm clouds gathering ominously on the distant horizon, sensing the impending doom that this union foretold. Meanwhile, back in Sparta, King Menelaus's initial rage had slowly hardened into a cold, implacable determination. The messengers he had sent to his brother Agamemnon returned with solemn promises of full support. As High King among the Greeks, Agamemnon, driven by his own ambitions, immediately began the arduous process of calling in old alliances. He meticulously reminded the former suitors of their sacred oath, the vow that bound them to Helen's marriage. For Agamemnon, the brazen abduction of Helen offered something he had long desired. It provided the perfect, indisputable justification. It was a reason to unite the often fractious and independent kingdoms of Greece under his singular command. It also presented a grand opportunity to extend his own immense power and influence across the Aegean Sea, perhaps even to bring the wealthy trading cities of Asia Minor under Greek dominion. This war, for him, would begin for Helen, but Agamemnon's ambitions stretched far beyond the mere recovery of his brother's wife. After several days at sea, the distinctive coastline of Asia Minor gracefully appeared on the horizon, a welcome sight for the weary travelers. The great city of Troy stood proud and magnificent on its commanding hill, its mighty walls catching the golden light of the setting sun, a beacon of strength and security. As Paris's ship approached the bustling harbor, word of the prince's unexpected return, and more importantly, of his extraordinary companion, raced quickly ahead to the royal palace. King Priam and Queen Hecuba, surrounded by their many children and trusted advisers, received their son in the grand hall of Troy. Paris, with an air of triumphant possessiveness, proudly proclaimed Helen as his new bride. He also displayed the immense treasure he had brought from Sparta, laying it before his father as a testament to his success and a symbol of their newfound wealth. While some within the court murmured with understandable concern, grasping the grave implications of taking another king's wife, many were simply dazzled by Helen's unparalleled beauty. It was widely said that whenever she entered a room, all conversation ceased, and a profound silence fell, as if a goddess had truly descended among them, captivating every eye. Her presence commanded an almost mystical awe and reverence. Not everyone, however, welcomed the new arrival with unreserved joy or blind acceptance. Cassandra, Paris's sister, who had been both blessed and tragically cursed by the god Apollo with the gift of prophecy, cried out in horror when she first saw Helen. Her eyes, filled with a desperate vision of the future, saw doom. "Fire!" she screamed, her voice filled with a desperate terror that few understood. "I see fire consuming Troy's walls. Take her back before it's too late." But Cassandra's fate was cruel and profoundly tragic. Though she spoke only the absolute truth, conveying precise and accurate visions of the terrible future, no one, not a single soul, would ever believe her prophecies. The court, tragically, dismissed her urgent warnings as mere madness, as they had always done, unable to grasp the terrible reality she foresaw or the dire consequences of their actions. Hector, Paris's eldest brother and Troy's greatest, most honorable warrior, was more measured in his concern, yet his apprehension was profound and deeply felt. He spoke privately to Paris, his voice filled with a brotherly concern and a deep understanding of the gravity of the situation they now faced. "Brother," he said, his words carefully chosen and weighted with foreboding, "have you truly considered the full ramifications of what you have done? You have taken another man's wife. And not just any man, but a powerful king of Greece. Do you honestly think Menelaus will simply accept this immense loss without severe consequence? Do you truly believe his incredibly powerful brother, Agamemnon, the High King of Mycenae, will simply let this unforgivable insult stand without fierce retribution?" Paris, in his youthful arrogance and newfound confidence, dismissively waved away these legitimate concerns, ignoring the wisdom of his elder brother. "The Greeks are divided among themselves," he replied with a confident air. "Their kings quarrel as often as they feast together. They are not a unified force capable of such an undertaking." He continued, "And even if they do come, what of it? Has any army, no matter how formidable, ever breached Troy's mighty walls? Our city has stood for generations, strong and secure, protected by the gods themselves. We are impregnable." In the days that followed, Paris and Helen were formally married according to traditional Trojan custom and religious rites. The people of Troy, filled with curiosity and excitement, lined the streets to catch a glimpse of the legendary beauty as she processed to the temple, a vision of ethereal grace and captivating charm. Some cheered the match, seeing it as a great triumph for Troy, a clear sign that their prince had won a bride coveted by all of Greece, thereby elevating their city's prestige and glory. Others, perhaps those who were wiser and more discerning, saw storm clouds gathering ominously on the distant horizon, sensing the impending doom that this fateful union foretold. Meanwhile, back in Sparta, King Menelaus's initial rage, a raw and burning fury, had slowly hardened into a cold, implacable determination for vengeance. The messengers he had urgently dispatched to his powerful brother Agamemnon, the High King, returned with solemn promises of full and unwavering support. As the acknowledged High King among the Greeks, Agamemnon, driven both by his brother's plight and his own profound ambitions, immediately began the arduous process of calling in old alliances and invoking ancient loyalties. He meticulously reminded all the former suitors of Helen of the sacred oath they had sworn years ago, the solemn vow that bound them to defend Helen's marriage. For Agamemnon, the brazen abduction of Helen offered something he had long and secretly desired. It provided the perfect, indisputable justification. It was a reason to unite the often fractious and independent kingdoms of Greece under his singular, commanding authority. It also presented a grand and tantalizing opportunity to extend his own immense power and influence across the Aegean Sea, perhaps even to bring the wealthy trading cities of Asia Minor, including Troy, under direct Greek dominion and tribute. This war, for him, would certainly begin for Helen, but Agamemnon's ambitions stretched far beyond the mere recovery of his brother's wife. They encompassed a vision of widespread Greek dominance. The gears of fate, set in motion by a golden apple and the reckless desire of a youthful prince, were now turning inexorably and swiftly toward a devastating and inevitable conflict. The casual spite of a lone goddess, Eris, driven by her exclusion, and the profound, reckless desire of a young, arrogant prince, Paris, had tragically set the stage for a war of unprecedented scale and unimaginable suffering. It would consume an entire generation of valiant heroes from both sides. It would, in its devastating conclusion, reduce a mighty, proud city to nothing more than scattered ashes and a fading memory. The waves parted gracefully before the prow of Paris's ship as it cut through the Aegean waters, heading swiftly and purposefully towards Troy. On the ship's deck, Helen stood, wrapped in a sea-splashed cloak, its fabric clinging gently to her form. Her golden hair, a shimmering cascade, caught the sunlight, creating a radiant halo around her head. Behind her, the familiar shores of Greece slowly receded into the morning mist, becoming a distant, indistinct line on the horizon. This was the homeland she might never see again, the life she had so dramatically and abruptly left behind. Was her heart truly filled with passionate love for the handsome Trojan prince at her side? Or was it heavy with profound regret for the life she had so completely abandoned, the husband and kingdom she had left behind? The ancient storytellers, with their myriad versions and differing perspectives, could never quite agree on her true feelings, leaving her complex inner world shrouded in mystery and open to endless interpretation. Helen's life, from its very beginning, had never truly been entirely her own. She was the legendary daughter of Zeus and Leda, or so the powerful myths claimed, a lineage that imbued her with an almost unearthly, divine allure. Her beauty was not merely exceptional, it was truly divine, a breathtaking gift from the gods themselves. Yet, this very gift was also a profound curse, an immense burden that had profoundly shaped her destiny from the very moment of her birth. Even as a young girl, her beauty had led to her first abduction. She had been taken by the hero Theseus, a bold and audacious act that caused great alarm throughout Greece, before her rightful suitors bravely rescued her and restored her to her home. Now, as a grown woman and the revered queen of Sparta, she once again found herself carried across the sea, a living prize in the complex and often cruel games played by both men and gods. Her fate seemed perpetually out of her own control, driven by forces far greater than herself. Paris, meanwhile, gazed triumphantly towards the distant horizon, a burning pride in his heart. He had won precisely what Aphrodite had promised him. The most beautiful woman in the entire world was now his companion, standing gracefully at his side. The considerable treasure from Menelaus's palace, carefully loaded onto his ship, would serve as a worthy and impressive gift for his father, King Priam, a tangible symbol of his successful venture and newfound prestige. But Helen herself was the true prize, the ultimate symbol of his triumph and Aphrodite's unwavering favor. In his youthful arrogance and overwhelming desire, Paris gave little thought to the terrible and far-reaching consequences that might inevitably follow his actions. The gods had favored him, he truly believed, and that powerful divine blessing seemed to him entirely sufficient, making him feel protected and almost invincible. After several days at sea, the distinctive coastline of Asia Minor gracefully appeared on the horizon, a welcome sight for the weary travelers. The great city of Troy stood proud and magnificent on its commanding hill, its mighty walls catching the golden light of the setting sun, a beacon of strength and security. As Paris's ship approached the bustling harbor, word of the prince's unexpected return, and more importantly, of his extraordinary companion, raced quickly ahead to the royal palace. King Priam and Queen Hecuba, surrounded by their many children and trusted advisors, received their son in the grand hall of Troy. Paris, with an air of triumphant possessiveness, proudly proclaimed Helen as his new bride. He also displayed the immense treasure he had brought from Sparta, laying it before his father as a testament to his success and a symbol of their newfound wealth. While some within the court murmured with understandable concern, grasping the grave implications of taking another king's wife, many were simply dazzled by Helen's unparalleled beauty. It was widely said that whenever she entered a room, all conversation ceased, and a profound silence fell, as if a goddess had truly descended among them, captivating every eye. Her presence commanded an almost mystical awe and reverence. Not everyone, however, welcomed the new arrival with unreserved joy or blind acceptance. Cassandra, Paris's sister, who had been both blessed and tragically cursed by the god Apollo with the gift of prophecy, cried out in horror when she first saw Helen. Her eyes, filled with a desperate vision of the future, saw doom. "Fire!" she screamed, her voice filled with a desperate terror that few understood. "I see fire consuming Troy's walls. Take her back before it's too late." But Cassandra's fate was cruel and profoundly tragic. Though she spoke only the absolute truth, conveying precise and accurate visions of the terrible future, no one, not a single soul, would ever believe her prophecies. The court, tragically, dismissed her urgent warnings as mere madness, as they had always done, unable to grasp the terrible reality she foresaw or the dire consequences of their actions. Hector, Paris's eldest brother and Troy's greatest, most honorable warrior, was more measured in his concern, yet his apprehension was profound and deeply felt. He spoke privately to Paris, his voice filled with a brotherly concern and a deep understanding of the gravity of the situation they now faced. "Brother," he said, his words carefully chosen and weighted with foreboding, "have you truly considered the full ramifications of what you have done? You have taken another man's wife. And not just any man, but a powerful king of Greece. Do you honestly think Menelaus will simply accept this immense loss without severe consequence? Do you truly believe his incredibly powerful brother, Agamemnon, the High King of Mycenae, will simply let this unforgivable insult stand without fierce retribution?" Paris, in his youthful arrogance and newfound confidence, dismissively waved away these legitimate concerns, ignoring the wisdom of his elder brother. "The Greeks are divided among themselves," he replied with a confident air. "Their kings quarrel as often as they feast together. They are not a unified force capable of such an undertaking." He continued, "And even if they do come, what of it? Has any army, no matter how formidable, ever breached Troy's mighty walls? Our city has stood for generations, strong and secure, protected by the gods themselves. We are impregnable." In the days that followed, Paris and Helen were formally married according to traditional Trojan custom and religious rites. The people of Troy, filled with curiosity and excitement, lined the streets to catch a glimpse of the legendary beauty as she processed to the temple, a vision of ethereal grace and captivating charm. Some cheered the match, seeing it as a great triumph for Troy, a clear sign that their prince had won a bride coveted by all of Greece, thereby elevating their city's prestige and glory. Others, perhaps those who were wiser and more discerning, saw storm clouds gathering ominously on the distant horizon, sensing the impending doom that this fateful union foretold. Meanwhile, back in Sparta, King Menelaus's initial rage, a raw and burning fury, had slowly hardened into a cold, implacable determination for vengeance. The messengers he had urgently dispatched to his powerful brother Agamemnon, the High King, returned with solemn promises of full and unwavering support. As the acknowledged High King among the Greeks, Agamemnon, driven both by his brother's plight and his own profound ambitions, immediately began the arduous process of calling in old alliances and invoking ancient loyalties. He meticulously reminded all the former suitors of Helen of the sacred oath they had sworn years ago, the solemn vow that bound them to defend Helen's marriage. For Agamemnon, the brazen abduction of Helen offered something he had long and secretly desired. It provided the perfect, indisputable justification. It was a reason to unite the often fractious and independent kingdoms of Greece under his singular, commanding authority. It also presented a grand and tantalizing opportunity to extend his own immense power and influence across the Aegean Sea, perhaps even to bring the wealthy trading cities of Asia Minor, including Troy, under direct Greek dominion and tribute. This war, for him, would certainly begin for Helen, but Agamemnon's ambitions stretched far beyond the mere recovery of his brother's wife. They encompassed a vision of widespread Greek dominance. The gears of fate, set in motion by a golden apple and the reckless desire of a youthful prince, were now turning inexorably and swiftly toward a devastating and inevitable conflict. The casual spite of a lone goddess, Eris, driven by her exclusion, and the profound, reckless desire of a young, arrogant prince, Paris, had tragically set the stage for a war of unprecedented scale and unimaginable suffering. It would consume an entire generation of valiant heroes from both sides. It would, in its devastating conclusion, reduce a mighty, proud city to nothing more than scattered ashes and a fading memory. The formal call to arms spread from kingdom to kingdom across Greece. The powerful oath that had bound Helen's former suitors was solemnly invoked, its ancient words now carrying immense gravity. Ships, both war galleys and transport vessels, began to gather steadily at Aulis. This was the designated rendezvous point where the combined Greek force, the Achaeans as Homer would call them in his epic poems, would launch their great fleet towards the shores of Troy. Some kings came eagerly, seeing the looming conflict as a grand opportunity for glory, for plunder, and for increasing their own prestige. Others, bound by their sacred oath but perhaps doubtful of the cause or fearful of the immense cost, came reluctantly, their hearts heavy with foreboding. The harbor at Aulis began to fill, ship by ship, day by day. Vessels from every corner of Greece arrived, their sails furled tight against tall masts, creating a dense forest of timber where once there had been only open, sparkling water. On the shore, thousands upon thousands of men made their temporary camp. Kings and princes, noble warriors, and common soldiers, all gathered under the unifying banner of vengeance and the shared goal of reclaiming Helen. The greatest military force the ancient world had ever seen was slowly but surely assembling, a truly awe-inspiring sight of collective might and determination. At its head, standing as the supreme commander, was Agamemnon, the king of rich Mycenae and brother to the wronged Menelaus. Agamemnon's royal tent dominated the vast shoreline. It was marked prominently by his distinctive royal standard, a symbol of his authority and leadership over the immense host. Inside this commanding tent, the High King met frequently with the other principal leaders of the expedition. They traced their elaborate plans on maps spread across tables of polished wood, strategizing their advance. Agamemnon's face was often grim, yet it also carried a deep satisfaction. For years, he had harbored a secret ambition to extend his powerful influence across the Aegean Sea, to bring the wealthy trading cities of Asia Minor under Greek dominion. Now, Paris, by his reckless act, had handed him the perfect, undeniable justification. This war would indeed begin for Helen, a matter of honor and retribution, but Agamemnon's true ambitions stretched far beyond the mere recovery of his brother's wife. They encompassed a grand vision of a unified and dominant Greek empire. Not all of the Greek kings had come willingly to Aulis. Some had attempted to evade the call, deeply reluctant to leave their prosperous kingdoms for what might prove to be years of brutal fighting on distant shores. Odysseus, the clever and resourceful ruler of rocky Ithaca, renowned for his sharp wit, had feigned madness when Agamemnon's messengers arrived. He had yoked an ox and a horse together, an unnatural pairing, to plough his fields in a bizarre manner. He then sowed these fields with salt instead of precious seed, a clear sign of insanity. But Palamedes, one of Agamemnon's craftier allies and a shrewd observer, saw through the deception. He placed Odysseus's infant son, Telemachus, directly in the path of the plough. Odysseus, instinctively, swerved the plough to avoid harming his beloved child, instantly proving his sanity and revealing his clever deception. Bound by his sacred oath, he had no choice but to join the expedition, though his heart remained heavy, longing for his home in Ithaca with his loyal wife Penelope and their young son. The greatest challenge in gathering the forces, however, was finding Achilles. He was the young warrior whom prophecy had named as absolutely essential to Greek victory. Achilles was the mighty son of King Peleus and the sea nymph Thetis, yes, the very couple whose wedding had innocently set these monumental events in motion. Achilles was said to be nearly invincible, save for his heel, the greatest fighter of his generation, destined for unparalleled glory. But his mother, Thetis, knowing that war meant certain death for her beloved son, had desperately hidden him away. She had taken him to the remote island of Skyros, disguising him as a girl among the daughters of King Lycomedes, hoping to avert his tragic fate. Odysseus, now fully committed to the cause and ever the strategist, devised a brilliant plan to reveal Achilles. Disguised as a traveling merchant, he brought gifts for the king's daughters, fine fabrics, shimmering jewels, and other feminine treasures. But, among these seemingly ordinary gifts, he subtly included a magnificent sword and a sturdy shield. While the girls eagerly admired the pretty trinkets, one reached instinctively and with practiced ease for the weapons, her fingers closing around the hilt of the sword, revealing a warrior's instinct that no disguise could possibly hide. Achilles' true identity was thus uncovered, and he too, with his destiny now clear, joined the gathering forces at Aulis, bringing with him his loyal companion Patroclus and a formidable contingent of his elite warriors, the Myrmidons. With each passing day, more and more ships arrived at Aulis, swelling the already immense fleet. From the proud city of Athens came 50 vessels under the command of King Menestheus. Diams, a fierce and brave warrior, led 80 ships from Argos. Ajax the Greater, a towering figure of immense strength and courage, a warrior second only to Achilles in might, brought 12 ships from Salamis. His namesake, Ajax the Lesser, a swift and agile fighter, arrived with 40 ships from Locris. Nestor, the oldest and wisest of all the kings, whose counsel and wisdom were deeply respected by every leader, sailed from sandy Pylos with 90 ships. In total, nearly 1,200 ships gathered in the vast bay, a truly astonishing sight. These vessels carried some 100,000 men, a massive army that represented the combined might of all Greece, unified for a single purpose. Among this vast and imposing host, certain figures stood out for their unique abilities or destinies. There was Philoctetes, who possessed the mighty, unerring bow of Heracles, a weapon of immense power. Idomeneus led the Cretan forces, his distinct helmet adorned with boar's tusks in the ancient, traditional style. The skilled healer Macon and his brother Podalirius, both sons of the revered god of medicine Asclepius, would tend to the wounded, their medical knowledge invaluable in the grim realities of war. And watching it all with keen, often troubled eyes was Calchas, the expedition's foremost seer and prophet, whose prophecies would guide the expedition and sometimes reveal painful truths. Yet, despite this unprecedented gathering of military power, the colossal fleet remained stubbornly anchored in the harbor, unable to set sail. For weeks, the winds refused to blow, leaving the waters of the bay flat and still as polished bronze. The great ships sat motionless, their sails furled tight, their anchors firmly set. As days stretched into agonizing weeks, discontent began to spread steadily through the massive encampment. Morale began to wane. Some men whispered that the gods themselves opposed the expedition, withholding the necessary winds as a sign of their displeasure. Others suggested, with growing desperation, that they should simply return home before the approaching winter made sailing even more dangerous, trapping them in the harbor. Desperate for a solution to this debilitating stalemate, Agamemnon, as the supreme commander, turned to Calchas, the expedition's prophet, whose connection to the divine was undeniable. The seer's face was grave, etched with profound sorrow, as he delivered his dreadful message. Artemis, the powerful goddess of the hunt, held back the crucial winds. She demanded a terrible sacrifice for an offense against her sacred deer, which had been killed in her sacred grove by the king's own hand, an act of sacrilege. The goddess, Calchas gravely declared, would accept nothing less than the life of Iphigenia, Agamemnon's eldest and most beloved daughter. She was to be sacrificed like a common animal upon an altar, a horrifying price for fair winds. The High King's face turned ashen at these chilling words. Iphigenia, his beautiful child, to be sacrificed for the sake of an army? He raged against the cruel prophecy. He called Calchas a false prophet, a purveyor of lies. He threatened to abandon the entire expedition and disband the army, so immense was his despair. But as the days relentlessly passed with no change in the winds, and as the other kings began to openly speak of returning to their homes, their patience exhausted, Agamemnon's initial resolve weakened. The pressure of leadership and the weight of their collective oath slowly crushed his paternal heart. Finally, with immense internal turmoil, he sent word to his wife, Clytemnestra, in Mycenae. He ordered her to bring Iphigenia to Aulis, not for a sacrifice, but under the cruel pretense that she was to be married to the legendary Achilles. It was a cunning and unspeakably cruel deception, one that would later bear terrible and bloody fruit for Agamemnon himself. But in that moment of desperation, Agamemnon convinced himself it was a necessary evil, a grim requirement for the greater purpose of uniting Greece and launching the vast expedition. Mother and daughter arrived at Aulis, adorned for a joyous wedding, their hearts filled with anticipation. Iphigenia, eager to see her father and excited by the prospect of marriage to the legendary Achilles, rushed from the chariot into Agamemnon's embrace. The king held his daughter tightly, tears streaming silently down his face, knowing the horrifying fate that awaited her. The ancient accounts of what happened next differ, adding to the poignant tragedy. Some say that Iphigenia, upon discovering the terrible truth and displaying a courage worthy of her royal blood, willingly offered herself for sacrifice. She chose to die to ensure Greek victory and the honor of her father. Others tell a more brutal tale, that she was taken by force to the altar, crying and pleading for her young life, her desperate pleas unheard as the blade fell. This chilling act, this immense sacrifice, finally brought the long-awaited winds. The fleet could now, at last, set sail. The terrible sacrifice at Aulis had been made. The grim deed had been performed, a horrifying price paid for divine favor. With the life of young Iphigenia extinguished, the long-awaited winds finally began to stir. They sighed through the rigging of the immense Greek fleet, filling the sails of the waiting ships. The vast expanse of the Aegean Sea, which had for so long lain flat and unresponsive, now shimmered with promise. A sense of solemn purpose settled over the assembled Achaean warriors. The moment of their grand departure had at last arrived. This was the true beginning of their monumental journey, a voyage that would carry them across the wine-dark sea to the fabled city of Troy. Under the supreme command of King Agamemnon, the thousands of ships, a veritable forest of masts and sails, began to move. They slowly emerged from the constricted harbor of Aulis. The sight must have been truly awe-inspiring, a display of naval power unprecedented in the ancient world. Each vessel, from the smallest scout ship to the largest transport, was laden with brave warriors, their gleaming bronze armor reflecting the sunlight. They carried countless supplies, painstakingly gathered for a war that everyone knew would be long and arduous. The rhythmic dip of oars provided a deep, steady beat, a pulse of determination, as the ships pushed through the waves. The collective will of 100,000 men, bound by an ancient oath and fueled by a thirst for vengeance, propelled them forward. The journey across the Aegean was not without its challenges, though the immediate divine impediment had been lifted. The sea, with its unpredictable moods, always presented dangers. Storms could rise suddenly, threatening to scatter the fleet or dash ships against hidden shoals. Navigation in those ancient times relied heavily on the stars, the sun, and the subtle cues of wind and current. The vast number of ships meant that maintaining formation was a constant effort, requiring skilled navigators and experienced captains. However, guided by their divine purpose and the leadership of their kings, the immense armada pressed onward, leaving the familiar shores of Greece behind them, slowly disappearing into the hazy distance. Each passing wave brought them closer to the fateful land of Asia Minor, closer to the city of Troy. Finally, after what must have felt like an interminable journey, the distinctive coastline of the Troad, the region surrounding Troy, appeared on the horizon. The great city itself, proud and formidable, stood upon its prominent hill, its massive stone walls catching the light of the sun. It was a sight that must have filled the Greek warriors with a mixture of anticipation, dread, and grim determination. This was their destination, the prize of their long journey, the object of their collective wrath. The ships began to maneuver, seeking a suitable landing place along the extensive coastline. They chose a wide, sweeping plain that stretched from the shore inland, leading directly towards the city. This area, dominated by the winding Scamander River, would become the battleground for the next 10 years. The landing itself was a chaotic and dangerous undertaking. The Trojans, alerted to the approach of such an immense force, were undoubtedly prepared. Their warriors would have been stationed on the beaches, ready to repel the invaders. The Achaeans would have had to leap from their ships into the shallow waters, perhaps under a hail of arrows and spears, struggling to establish a foothold on foreign soil. Tradition tells of brave heroes leading the charge, their names now part of legend. Patroclus, one of the very first to leap ashore, was immediately struck down by a Trojan spear, fulfilling an ancient prophecy that the first to land would be the first to die. His death served as a grim warning of the terrible cost of this war, a stark reminder that even the bravest could fall. Yet, Despite the fierce initial resistance, the sheer numbers and unwavering determination of the Greeks allowed them to establish their beachhead. They quickly set about constructing a vast, fortified encampment. This camp, protected by a sturdy wall, would become their home for the next decade, a temporary city on enemy soil. The early years of the Trojan War were not a continuous, grand siege in the modern sense. Instead, they comprised a long, grinding period of intermittent warfare, skirmishes, and raids. Troy itself was an immensely strong city. Its walls were famous, built, some legends claimed, with the help of the gods Poseidon and Apollo. Breaching such fortifications would require a sustained effort beyond anything the Greeks were prepared for in the immediate aftermath of their landing. The Trojans, with their allies from various regions of Asia Minor, were also a formidable defensive force, led by their valiant prince Hector. During these initial years, the Greek strategy involved raiding the surrounding countryside. This served multiple purposes. It allowed them to gather much-needed supplies, as maintaining an army of 100,000 men on foreign soil required vast quantities of food, water, and resources. These raids also aimed to weaken Troy by cutting off its supply lines and reducing its allied support. The Achaeans launched expeditions against nearby towns and cities, sacking them for plunder and capturing women and children to be taken as slaves. These ventures provided valuable spoils of war, which were then divided among the chieftains, and helped sustain the morale of the common soldiers. However, these raids also spread the Greek forces thin, exposing them to ambushes and counterattacks from the Trojans and their allies. One of the most notable early encounters involved Achilles himself. His swiftness and ferocity in battle were legendary even at this early stage. He led many of these raiding parties, his myrmidons striking fear into the hearts of their enemies. He sacked several towns in the Troad, including Lyrnessus, Thebe, and Lesbos. It was during the sack of Lyrnessus that Achilles captured a beautiful woman named Briseis, who would later become a pivotal figure in the great quarrel that defined the Iliad. These early campaigns established Achilles' reputation as the most fearsome warrior on the Greek side, a veritable force of nature whose presence alone could turn the tide of battle. His actions brought immense plunder and glory to the Greek camp, but they also fueled the growing tensions between the proud Achaean kings. Life in the Greek camp during these 10 long years was a mixture of arduous military duty, tedious waiting, and the ever-present threat of disease and boredom. The vast army, comprised of men from many different city-states with their own customs and loyalties, was not always a harmonious whole. Disputes over plunder, honor, and command were common. Agamemnon, as the High King, constantly faced the challenge of maintaining unity and discipline among his proud and often volatile subordinate kings. His authority, though supreme, was not absolute, and relied heavily on diplomacy and the respect, or sometimes fear, he commanded. The Trojans, on their side, were not idle either. Secure within their formidable walls, they frequently launched sallies, sudden attacks from their gates, to harass the Greek camp, defend their fields, and protect their allies. Hector, their most valiant champion, led many of these engagements, proving himself a formidable opponent to the greatest Greek heroes. He was renowned for his courage, his skill in battle, and his deep devotion to his city and family. His presence was a constant source of strength and hope for the Trojans, inspiring them to fight with unwavering determination against the overwhelming Greek force. The constant skirmishing and the protracted nature of the siege meant that many heroes from both sides met their end during these early years. Lesser-known warriors, as well as some prominent figures, fell in the dust of the plain, their names remembered only in the fleeting verses of bards or forgotten entirely by history. The very earth outside Troy became saturated with the blood of brave men, a testament to the grinding attrition of the war. Despite the valiant efforts on both sides, the war seemed to be in a perpetual stalemate. The Greeks could not breach Troy's walls, and the Trojans could not drive the Greeks back into the sea. This deadlock would continue for years, until a fateful quarrel among the Greek leaders threatened to unravel the entire expedition. The true turning point in the long, arduous war came in its 10th year. It began with a bitter and escalating dispute between the two most powerful figures on the Achaean side, Agamemnon, the High King, and Achilles, the greatest warrior. This quarrel, chronicled in magnificent detail by Homer in his Iliad, became the central catalyst for a new phase of the war, one marked by immense suffering and profound loss for the Greeks. The source of this discord was, ironically, a matter of honor and a captured woman. During one of their successful raids on a city allied with Troy, Achilles had captured a beautiful maiden named Chryseis. She was the daughter of a priest of Apollo. When the priest came to the Greek camp, offering a substantial ransom for his daughter's return, Agamemnon, in his arrogance and greed, stubbornly refused. He insulted the priest and sent him away, a grave affront to the gods. The enraged priest prayed to Apollo, his divine patron, for vengeance. Apollo, ever protective of his priests, unleashed a terrible plague upon the Greek camp. The pestilence swept through the Achaean forces, felling warriors by the thousands. The air grew thick with the stench of death, and the pyres burned constantly, consuming the bodies of the fallen. Desperate to understand the cause of this divine wrath, Agamemnon reluctantly consulted Calchas, the seer who had prophesied Iphigenia's sacrifice. Calchas, fearing Agamemnon's wrath, hesitated. But Achilles, seeing the suffering of his comrades, pressed the prophet to speak the truth, promising him protection. Calchas then revealed the grim truth. Apollo's anger was directed at Agamemnon for his disrespectful treatment of the priest and his refusal to return Chryseis. Faced with the undeniable evidence of divine displeasure, Agamemnon was forced to relent. He agreed to return Chryseis to her father, but his pride was deeply wounded. To compensate for his loss, and to reassert his authority, he demanded a replacement prize. His eyes fell upon Briseis, the woman Achilles had captured during the sack of Lyrnessus, the very woman Achilles had come to cherish. This demand was a direct insult, a public humiliation of Achilles. Achilles, a man of immense pride and fiery temper, was enraged. He had fought bravely for the Achaeans, enduring countless hardships, only to have his rightful prize, his honor, stripped away by his own commander. In a furious outburst, he denounced Agamemnon, accusing him of greed and injustice. He declared that he would no longer fight for the Achaeans. He would withdraw himself and his mighty Myrmidons from the battle, and sit idly by his ships, leaving the Greeks to face the Trojans without his indispensable might. Despite the desperate pleas of wise Nestor and other respected elders, neither Agamemnon nor Achilles would yield. Agamemnon took Briseis, and Achilles, consumed by his wrath and wounded pride, retreated to his tent. He vowed to take no further part in the fighting until the Achaeans faced such dire straits that they would be forced to beg for his return. This profound withdrawal of Achilles, the Greeks' greatest warrior, marked a catastrophic turning point in the war. Without his presence on the battlefield, the balance of power shifted dramatically. The Trojans, emboldened by his absence and the apparent discord among their enemies, began to press their advantage with renewed ferocity. The once formidable Greek lines began to falter. The profound withdrawal of Achilles, the Greeks' greatest and most formidable warrior, had cast a long and chilling shadow over the Achaean camp. His decision, born of wounded pride and a searing sense of injustice, left an irreplaceable void on the battlefield. Without his legendary might, without the sheer terror his presence inspired in the Trojan ranks, the balance of power shifted dramatically and devastatingly. The Trojans, observing the absence of their most dreaded opponent and sensing the deep discord among their Greek adversaries, were immediately emboldened. They began to press their advantage with a newfound ferocity, their attacks becoming more daring and relentless. The once formidable Greek lines, which had held strong for so many years, now began to falter, their defenses showing dangerous cracks. Day after day, the fighting grew increasingly desperate for the Achaeans. The Trojans, under the brilliant leadership of their own champion, Prince Hector, pushed the Greeks relentlessly back towards their fortified camp. The din of battle grew louder, echoing across the plains of Troy. Swords clashed against shields with a sickening thud, and the cries of dying men filled the air. The Greeks, without Achilles, found themselves on the defensive, struggling to hold their ground. Their glorious ships, once symbols of their ambition and strength, now seemed dangerously exposed, vulnerable to being overwhelmed and set ablaze. The very survival of the entire expedition hung precariously in the balance. The Achaean leaders, including the mighty Ajax the Greater, the cunning Odysseus, and the brave Diames, fought with unparalleled valor. They stood firm against the surging Trojan tide, striving to stem the relentless advance. Yet, even their combined heroism seemed insufficient against the renewed vigor of the Trojans and their formidable allies. The wounded multiplied in the Greek camp, overwhelming the healers. Despair began to creep into the hearts of even the bravest warriors. King Agamemnon, filled with deep regret and gnawing fear, recognized the catastrophic mistake he had made. He had gravely underestimated Achilles' pride and the indispensable value of his presence. In a desperate attempt to rectify his error, Agamemnon sent a delegation to Achilles' tent. He offered vast treasures, including gold, magnificent horses, and the return of Briseis, untouched, along with other noble women. He even offered 7 wealthy cities as a token of his profound apology. But Achilles, consumed by his monumental wrath, remained unmoved. He listened to their pleas, but his anger had festered too deeply. His wounded pride was too immense to be assuaged by mere riches or apologies, however lavish. He remembered the public humiliation, the insult to his honor. He declared that he would not return to battle until the flames of Trojan victory threatened his own ships, the vessels that had carried him across the sea. Only then, he asserted, would he consider raising his spear once more. His words were cold and resolute, hardening the hearts of the envoys. As the Trojan assault intensified, their warriors, led by the indomitable Hector, finally breached the mighty Greek wall. This was the defensive rampart that the Achaeans had painstakingly constructed to protect their ships and their camp. The Trojans swarmed inside, their triumphant war cries echoing across the plain. They were now perilously close to the ships themselves, wielding torches, ready to set the entire fleet ablaze. The air grew thick with smoke, and the Greeks fought with the desperation of men whose backs were against the wall, their very escape route threatened. Panic began to spread through the ranks. It was at this dire moment that Patroclus, Achilles' dearest friend and loyal companion, could no longer bear to witness the suffering of his fellow Greeks. His heart ached with compassion and grave concern for their survival. Patroclus approached Achilles, his face etched with sorrow and earnest pleading. He begged his friend, almost on his knees, to return to the fray. When Achilles still refused, unwavering in his stubborn resolve, Patroclus made a desperate, daring proposal. He asked Achilles for permission to wear his magnificent armor. The very sight of Achilles' gleaming bronze, his distinctive shield, and his towering spear might, he reasoned, strike terror into the Trojans. It might trick them into believing Achilles had returned, thus buying the Greeks precious time to regroup and push back the relentless assault. Achilles, after much agonizing internal conflict, finally relented. His love for Patroclus, and perhaps a flicker of concern for his comrades, swayed him. He agreed to the plan, but he issued a solemn, stark warning. Patroclus was to drive the Trojans back from the ships, to extinguish the immediate threat. He was to push them away from the ramparts. But he was under no circumstances to pursue them further, not to press the attack towards the formidable walls of Troy. Patroclus was to return to the camp immediately once the ships were safe. This was the limit of Achilles' concession, born of his fear for his friend's life and his continued resentment towards Agamemnon. So, Patroclus donned the gleaming, unmistakable armor of Achilles. It fit him perfectly, as if crafted for his own form. He mounted Achilles' chariot, driven by the immortal horses Xanthus and Balius. The moment he appeared on the battlefield, a wave of terror swept through the Trojan ranks. They believed, with every fiber of their being, that the mighty Achilles had finally returned. The tide of battle turned almost instantly. The Trojans, their morale shattered by the apparent return of their greatest enemy, fell back in disarray. Patroclus, filled with a surge of divine-like strength and the courage of his friend, fought with incredible ferocity. He drove the Trojans from the ships, pushing them well beyond the Greek walls, his every blow a testament to his valor. He killed many brave Trojan warriors, his fury a reflection of Achilles' own. However, Patroclus became swept away by the exhilaration of battle. He ignored Achilles' solemn warning, pushed by the heat of the moment and a desire for even greater glory. He pursued the retreating Trojans relentlessly, pressing the attack all the way to the very gates of Troy itself. His spear tasted the blood of many, and his valor was undeniable. But his hubris, or perhaps simply the will of the gods, would prove fatal. Three powerful forces converged to bring about his tragic end. First, Apollo, the divine protector of Troy, invisibly struck Patroclus from behind, disorienting him and causing his helmet to fall from his head, exposing him to danger. Then, Euphorbus, a Trojan warrior, wounded him with a spear thrust. Finally, Hector, Troy's valiant champion, sensing the moment of weakness, delivered the fatal blow. Hector's spear pierced Patroclus's body, bringing the mighty warrior down. As Patroclus lay dying, he uttered a prophecy. Hector, too, would soon fall at the hands of Achilles. With his last breath, the loyal companion faded. The death of Patroclus was a moment of immense, unbearable tragedy for the Achaeans, but for Achilles, it was a cataclysm. The news reached him quickly, carried by Antilochus, Nestor's son, who delivered the devastating blow. Achilles' world shattered. His proud anger, which had kept him isolated and defiant, now transformed into a grief so profound and a rage so consuming that it threatened to obliterate him entirely. He let out a terrifying cry, a shriek of raw anguish that echoed across the plains, reaching even the distant ears of his divine mother, Thetis, deep within the sea. He tore at his hair, covered himself in dust, and wept uncontrollably for his fallen friend, a bond stronger than brotherhood severed in an instant. Thetis, hearing her son's heartbroken wail, rose from the depths of the sea. She came to comfort him, but she knew his grief would only be assuaged by vengeance. Achilles vowed to kill Hector, no matter the cost, no matter that it meant his own fated death, which had been prophesied to follow Hector's. He was ready to rejoin the battle, but he lacked his armor, which Hector had stripped from Patroclus's body as a trophy. In an act of maternal love and divine intervention, Thetis sought out the renowned smith god, Hephaestus, the divine artisan of Mount Olympus. She implored him to forge new armor for her son, armor fit for a god. Hephaestus, in his celestial forge, created a masterpiece. He fashioned a shield unlike any other, richly decorated with scenes of the cosmos, of peace and war, of daily life, reflecting the entirety of the mortal world. He made a helmet that gleamed like a star, a breastplate stronger than any bronze, and greaves for his legs. All were imbued with divine power and craftsmanship. This new, magnificent armor, glowing with an inner light, was brought to Achilles. As he donned it, a terrible beauty emanated from him. He was no longer just a man, but a living embodiment of vengeful fury, ready to exact a terrible price for his friend's death. Achilles, now armed and utterly consumed by his righteous rage, stormed onto the battlefield. His return sent a fresh wave of panic through the Trojan ranks, far greater than when Patroclus had worn his armor. His eyes blazed with a murderous fire. He cut through the Trojan lines like a whirlwind, mercilessly slaughtering all who stood in his path. The Scamander River, which flowed through the plain, became choked with bodies and stained crimson with blood as Achilles pursued his vengeance, showing no quarter. He was an unstoppable force, a whirlwind of death and destruction. He single-handedly turned the tide of battle once more, driving the Trojans back towards their city walls, their previous triumph forgotten in the face of his terrifying onslaught. The Trojans, desperate, retreated behind their high walls, seeking refuge from the wrath of Achilles. Only Hector, Troy's noble protector, remained outside the city gates. He stood alone, bravely awaiting Achilles, refusing to cower. Hector's parents, King Priam and Queen Hecuba, pleaded with him from the walls, begging him to come inside, to save himself from certain death. But Hector, driven by his sense of duty, his honor, and his recognition of his own role in Patroclus's death, stood his ground. He knew this was his fate, his moment to either save his city or fall trying. The two greatest warriors of their age, Achilles and Hector, finally confronted each other in a momentous duel that would decide the fate of both men and, to some extent, the war itself. Achilles, driven by raw vengeance, pursued Hector relentlessly around the walls of Troy. Hector, though brave, felt his courage waver for a moment, unnerved by the terrifying presence of the divinely armored Achilles. They circled the city 3 times, a desperate chase. Finally, they faced each other, spear against spear, shield against shield. Athena, disguised as Hector's brother Deiphobus, tricked Hector into believing he had an ally, urging him to stand and fight Achilles face to face. The duel was fierce, a clash of legendary might. Achilles, wielding his divinely forged spear, knew the weak points of his own old armor, which Hector was now wearing. He aimed directly for Hector's throat, the only exposed part of the armor. The spear found its mark, piercing through, taking Hector's life. As Hector lay dying, he pleaded with Achilles to return his body to his parents for proper burial, so that his family could mourn him with dignity. But Achilles, consumed by his grief and rage for Patroclus, refused, vowing to leave Hector's body for the dogs and birds to desecrate. After Hector's death, Achilles, in a brutal act of vengeance that horrified even the gods, tied Hector's body to his chariot by the ankles. He then dragged it 3 times around the walls of Troy, a public display of humiliation and desecration. The sight brought agonizing grief to Priam and Hecuba, watching their beloved son's body being defiled. 4 days, Achilles continued this horrific ritual, his grief and anger still unquenched. The gods, however, grew increasingly displeased by Achilles' excessive cruelty. They understood his sorrow, but the desecration of a noble warrior's body was an affront to cosmic order. Zeus sent the messenger god Hermes to guide King Priam to the Greek camp. Priam, in an act of immense courage and profound humility, entered the enemy camp under the cover of night. He found Achilles in his tent, still mourning Patroclus. Priam knelt before the man who had killed his beloved son, embracing Achilles' knees, and pleaded for Hector's body. He reminded Achilles of his own aging father, Peleus, and invoked the shared humanity of their grief. He offered a vast ransom for the return of his son's corpse. Achilles, seeing the venerable old king, and perhaps recalling his own father, was deeply moved. The grief in Priam's eyes resonated with his own profound sorrow for Patroclus. For a moment, his rage finally broke. Achilles wept with Priam, and a bond of shared humanity formed between killer and father. He accepted the ransom. He ordered Hector's body to be prepared with care, washed and anointed, and then returned it to Priam. He even granted a temporary truce for Hector's funeral. The return of Hector's body was a poignant moment of peace amidst the relentless war, a quiet acknowledgement of shared humanity and the universal pain of loss. Troy mourned its greatest defender, preparing him for the journey to the underworld with solemn rites. The death of Hector, Troy's valiant champion and the city's most formidable protector, had plunged the great city into a profound and pervasive grief. His funeral rites, conducted under the temporary truce granted by Achilles, were a solemn and heartbreaking affair. The mournful cries of Queen Hecuba and the lamentations of King Priam echoed through the very streets of Troy, touching the hearts of all who witnessed them. The Trojan people, who had long looked to Hector as their shield and their hope, felt a deep despair settle upon them. They knew, in their hearts, that a terrible void had been created, one that no other hero, however brave, could ever truly fill. With Hector gone, Troy's spirit, though not yet broken, felt the heavy weight of inevitable doom drawing steadily closer. Despite this overwhelming loss, the war was far from over. The Trojans, though weakened, still possessed their formidable walls and the fierce loyalty of their remaining citizens and valiant allies. King Priam, in a desperate attempt to shore up his defenses and inject new life into his beleaguered forces, sent urgent pleas for aid to distant lands. And aid did come, from unexpected corners of the ancient world, bringing with it a fleeting sense of renewed hope. First to arrive were the legendary Amazons, a formidable tribe of warrior women from the distant lands of the Black Sea. They were fierce and independent, renowned for their unparalleled skill in battle, their prowess with the spear and bow. Their queen was Penthesilea, a magnificent figure whose beauty was matched only by her terrifying courage and strength on the battlefield. She was said to be the daughter of Ars, the god of war, and her martial spirit was undeniable. Penthesilea, leading her formidable contingent of warrior women, entered Troy with a defiant spirit, ready to avenge Hector's death and perhaps to gain glory for herself and her people. For a brief time, her presence inspired the Trojans. She fought with incredible ferocity, cutting down many Greek warriors and pushing back their lines. Yet, even the awe-inspiring might of Penthesilea could not stand against the overwhelming destiny of the Greeks. In a tragic and climactic encounter, she too, like Hector before her, met her end at the hands of the indomitable Achilles. Tradition states that as Achilles struck the fatal blow, her helmet fell away, revealing her breathtaking beauty. In that instant, even Achilles felt a pang of profound regret, a fleeting recognition of the magnificent warrior he had just slain. Following the Amazons came another powerful ally, arriving from the distant lands of Ethiopia. This was Memnon, the magnificent son of Us, the goddess of the dawn. Memnon was a warrior of immense stature and formidable strength, often described as a dark-skinned counterpart to Achilles, a paragon of courage and leadership. He led a vast host of Ethiopian warriors, a fresh wave of disciplined and fierce fighters who instilled new confidence in the Trojans. Memnon, too, brought significant victories for Troy, his presence turning the tide in several fierce battles. He fought bravely against many Greek heroes, but his ultimate destiny was intertwined with that of Achilles. In a duel that mirrored the earlier clash between Achilles and Hector, Memnon and Achilles met in single combat. It was a fiercely contested battle between two demigods, both favored by their divine parents. Yet, just as Patroclus had fallen to Hector, and Hector to Achilles, so too did Memnon eventually succumb to Achilles' unparalleled might. His death was a profound blow to the Trojans, signaling that even their most powerful and divinely favored allies could not withstand the relentless power of the Greeks' greatest champion. Despite these new arrivals and the temporary resurgence of Trojan hopes, the war continued its grinding course. The Achaeans, even without the immediate presence of Achilles, who would sometimes sit out battles after his moments of intense fury, still held a massive numerical advantage. They maintained their siege, their objective clear, the fall of Troy. Yet, the loss of Hector and Memnon was deeply felt by the Trojans, and their morale, though occasionally buoyed by new allies, steadily eroded over the years. The wheel of fate, however, had one more devastating blow reserved for the Greeks. The very hero who had secured so many victories for them, the invincible Achilles himself, was destined to fall. The prophecies had long foretold that his death would follow Hector's. While the exact circumstances vary across different ancient accounts, the most widely accepted and enduring version of his demise describes a moment of vulnerability. It recounts that as Achilles pursued the Trojans, perhaps near the walls or in a skirmish, a single arrow found its mark. This arrow was shot by Paris, the very prince whose actions had initiated the entire war. The arrow, guided by the unseen hand of Apollo, who still held a grudge against Achilles for the killing of his priest's daughter Chryseis, struck Achilles in his vulnerable heel. This was the sole point on his body where his divine mother, Thetis, had held him when she dipped him in the magical waters of the river Styx during his infancy, thus making him invincible everywhere else. The wound, though seemingly small, was instantly fatal, poisoning his entire body. The greatest warrior of the age, the seemingly immortal Achilles, fell on the plains of Troy, his thunderous presence forever silenced. The death of Achilles sent a wave of profound despair and confusion through the Greek ranks. It was an almost unimaginable loss. The battle for his body was fierce, a desperate struggle to reclaim the fallen hero from the grasping hands of the Trojans. Ajax the Greater, a towering figure of immense strength and courage, second only to Achilles in martial prowess, fought heroically to defend Achilles' corpse. With the aid of Odysseus, the cunning and resourceful king, they managed to retrieve the body from the chaos of battle, bringing it back to the relative safety of the Greek camp. Following Achilles' solemn funeral rites, a new, bitter dispute arose among the Achaean leaders. It concerned the rightful heir to Achilles' magnificent, divinely crafted armor. This was no mere set of bronze plates. It was a symbol of unmatched valor and the very embodiment of the greatest warrior. Two prominent heroes laid claim to it, Ajax the Greater and Odysseus. Ajax, with his immense strength and his undeniable heroism in retrieving Achilles' body, believed the armor was his by right of physical prowess and bravery. Odysseus, however, argued that the armor should go to the man whose wisdom, strategic cunning, and eloquence were most akin to Achilles' own unique blend of qualities. He contended that mental strength, not just physical might, was paramount, especially in leadership. The Greek leaders, unable to resolve the dispute themselves, held a formal contest, or perhaps a formal debate, to decide the matter. Odysseus, with his renowned oratorical skills and his clever arguments, swayed the judges. He meticulously recounted his numerous contributions to the Greek cause, emphasizing his cunning plans and strategic interventions, arguing that these were the true hallmarks of a wise leader, essential for the war's ultimate success. The armor was awarded to Odysseus. For Ajax, this decision was a profound and unbearable humiliation. It was a public affront to his honor, an insult he could not possibly bear. He, the man who had physically protected Achilles' body, was denied the very symbol of his bravery. His proud heart, already strained by the long war and the recent loss, shattered under the weight of this perceived injustice. In a fit of madness, perhaps inflicted by the goddess Athena, who favored Odysseus, Ajax turned his rage against the Greek flocks, mistaking them for his fellow commanders. When he finally came to his senses, realizing the horrific shame of his actions, he could not endure the disgrace. He tragically fell upon his own sword, ending his valiant life in a desperate act of honor. The death of Ajax, a truly noble and powerful warrior, was another devastating blow to the Greeks, a loss that further weakened their ranks and deepened their weariness of the prolonged conflict. Years had now passed. 10 long, arduous years of siege, of battles, of losses on both sides. The Greek forces, despite their strength, were growing increasingly weary. Their initial enthusiasm had long since faded, replaced by a grim determination and a yearning for home. The formidable walls of Troy still stood defiant, seemingly impregnable. The war had settled into a seemingly endless stalemate. It became painfully clear to the Greek leaders that direct assault, no matter how powerful, would never succeed in breaching Troy's defenses. A new approach was desperately needed. The Achaean leaders, their spirits flagging, once again turned to the ancient prophecies and the wisdom of their seers, particularly Calchas. The prophecies revealed a series of seemingly insurmountable conditions that must be met for Troy to finally fall. They learned that the Greeks would need the divine bow of Heracles, which was currently held by Philoctetes. Philoctetes was the very hero they had abandoned on the desolate island of Lemnos years earlier due to a festering, foul-smelling wound caused by a snake bite, a wound that made him impossible to be around. They also learned that they needed Neoptolemus, Achilles' young son, who had been left behind in Skyros, now growing into a fierce warrior in his own right. And perhaps most importantly, they discovered that Troy could not fall as long as the sacred idol of Pallas Athena, known as the Palladion, remained within its walls. This ancient statue, believed to have fallen from the heavens, was considered the city's divine protector. Odysseus, ever the cunning strategist, took it upon himself to fulfill these prophecies. He sailed to Lemnos, sometimes accompanied by Diams, to retrieve Philoctetes. After much persuasion, and perhaps some trickery, Philoctetes was convinced to return to the Greek camp. There, the skilled healers Machaon and Podalirius, sons of Asclepius, finally healed his long-festering wound. With his mighty bow, inherited from the demigod Heracles, Philoctetes returned to battle, and in a decisive moment, shot Paris with a poisoned arrow. Paris, the instigator of the entire war, died a painful death, suffering a fate that mirrored the prolonged agony he had inflicted on both Greeks and Trojans. His death, while a personal victory for Menelaus, was not enough to end the siege. Odysseus also journeyed to Skyros to bring Neoptolemus to Troy. The young warrior, fierce and eager for glory, quickly proved himself a worthy son of Achilles, displaying remarkable courage and martial skill. His arrival provided a much-needed morale boost to the weary Greeks, a new embodiment of heroic might. Finally, Odysseus, often with the aid of Diams, undertook a daring and perilous mission to steal the Palladion from within Troy itself. Under the cover of darkness, they infiltrated the heavily guarded city, a feat of incredible stealth and bravery. They successfully snatched the sacred idol, a symbol of Troy's divine protection, from its temple. With the Palladion now in Greek hands, the last major prophecy was fulfilled. The city of Troy was, at last, vulnerable. Even with these crucial conditions met, the formidable walls of Troy still stood defiant. The Greeks knew that a direct assault, even with all prophecies fulfilled, would still cost them countless lives. It was then that Odysseus, his brilliant mind ever at work, conceived of his most audacious and legendary plan, the construction of the Trojan horse. He proposed a deceptive stratagem, a scheme so clever and so unexpected that it might finally bypass Troy's impregnable defenses. The plan was meticulously crafted. A massive wooden horse would be built, an enormous, hollow structure. The greatest of the Greek warriors, including Odysseus himself and Neoptolemus, would hide within its belly, concealed from Trojan eyes. The rest of the Greek army would then feign retreat, burning their camp and sailing their ships just out of sight, disappearing behind the nearby island of Tenedos. They would leave the horse behind as a seemingly harmless offering to Athena, or perhaps as a victory monument, a symbol of their supposed departure. Under the skilled guidance of Epeius, a master carpenter, the enormous wooden horse was constructed with remarkable speed and precision. It was a marvel of engineering and deception, a hollow behemoth crafted from fir planks, its eyes wide and its menere flowing, a majestic and innocent-looking statue. The chosen warriors, a select band of the bravest and most cunning, carefully climbed inside its dark, cavernous interior. They were armed only with their swords, trusting their lives entirely to Odysseus's ingenious plan. To complete the deception, one man was deliberately left behind on the Trojan plain, Sinon. He was a cunning Greek warrior, chosen for his eloquent speech and his unwavering nerve. Sinon was to present himself to the Trojans as a deserter, a lone survivor left behind by the retreating Greek fleet. His task was to weave a compelling tale, to convince the Trojans that the massive wooden horse was indeed a sacred offering to Athena, intended to atone for the Greek sacrilege against the Palladian. He would claim that the Greeks had built it so large that the Trojans would not be able to bring it into their city, thus denying Troy the divine favor of Athena. This, he would argue, was why the Greeks had left it behind. They hoped the Trojans would foolishly destroy it or leave it outside their walls. If the Trojans brought the horse into their city, he would claim, it would bring them immense divine favor and ensure their ultimate victory. The next morning, the Trojans emerged from their city walls, cautiously surveying the deserted plain. They found the massive wooden horse standing silently, an enigmatic presence in the dawn light. Their joy and relief at the apparent departure of the Greeks quickly turned to wonder and debate. What was this colossal structure? What did it mean? Sinon, lying bound and seemingly helpless nearby, was discovered by the Trojans. He was brought before King Priam, who, against the advice of some of his more cautious counselors, decided to hear the Greek story. Sinon, with tears in his eyes and a masterful display of feigned distress, recounted a fabricated tale of woe. He claimed he had been a victim of Odysseus's cruelty, left behind as a sacrifice by the Greeks. He swore oaths to the gods, convincing the sympathetic Trojans of his genuine suffering. He then explained the purpose of the horse, weaving a narrative so cunningly designed that it appealed directly to Trojan pride and piety. He claimed that the horse was a votive offering to Athena. He stated that it was built so large specifically to prevent the Trojans from taking it inside their city walls, thus denying them the goddess's favor. If they were to bring it within their defenses, he asserted, it would bring immense power and divine protection to Troy, making it utterly invincible. Most of the Trojans, weary of the long war and overjoyed by the apparent Greek retreat, were convinced by Sinon's eloquent deception. They were eager to celebrate their hard-won victory and bring this grand trophy into their city. However, a few voices of caution and doubt were raised. The most prominent among them was Laocoon, a priest of Poseidon, or perhaps Apollo, whose wisdom was rarely heeded. He warned his fellow citizens against the giant wooden effigy. "Beware of Greeks bearing gifts," he famously cried, his voice ringing with desperate urgency. "I fear the Danaans, even when they bring gifts." He suspected a trick, feeling an ominous presence about the seemingly benign wooden structure. To demonstrate his suspicion, he cast a spear against the horse's flank. The spear made a hollow, metallic sound, suggesting its interior was not solid wood, hinting at something hidden within. But Laocoon's prophetic warnings were tragically cut short. As he stood by the shore, making a sacrifice to Poseidon, two monstrous sea serpents, sent by the angry Athena, who was displeased that her Palladian had been stolen, and who favored the Greeks, rose from the churning depths of the Aegean. The colossal serpents coiled around Laocoon and his two young sons, crushing them in their powerful, suffocating embrace. Their agonizing screams filled the air before they were silenced forever. The Trojans, witnessing this horrifying spectacle, interpreted it as a clear sign of divine wrath. They believed Laocoon had been punished for defiling the sacred horse, for daring to strike it with his spear. His death, they concluded, was a divine validation of Sinon's story. With all doubts seemingly assuaged by Sinon's cunning and Laocoon's terrible fate, the Trojans made the fateful decision. They broke down a section of their impregnable city wall, creating a wide breach. They then toiled with immense effort, pulling the colossal wooden horse through the opening, dragging it into the very heart of their proud and unsuspecting city. They celebrated throughout the night, believing the war was finally over, reveling in their apparent triumph. The sounds of their joyous celebration echoed across the plains, a deceptive symphony of peace and victory, unaware of the grim fate awaiting them at dawn. The mighty city of Troy, proud and magnificent, now stood quietly, shrouded in the deceptive calm of a moonlit night. Within its formidable walls, the people of Troy celebrated with unbridled joy. They rejoiced in what they believed was their hard-won victory, their triumph over the Greeks after 10 long, grueling years of siege. The colossal wooden horse, a silent, hollow titan, stood as a monument to their supposed deliverance, a colossal symbol of their success. The sounds of revelry, of laughter and singing, of instruments playing joyous melodies, echoed through the streets, reaching every corner of the unsuspecting city. The air was filled with the sweet aroma of wine and the savory scent of roasted meats. The Trojans, exhausted by a decade of relentless warfare and hardship, had finally found reason to celebrate. They slept soundly, their hearts light with a peace they believed had been earned. But this peace was a cruel illusion, a deceptive veil woven by the cunning mind of Odysseus and the desperate will of the Achaean forces. As the late hours of the night deepened, and the sounds of celebration slowly faded into a profound and unsuspecting silence, the true nature of the wooden horse began its terrifying revelation. The moon, a cold, watchful eye in the inky sky, cast long, distorted shadows across the deserted streets of Troy. The stars twinkled with an ancient indifference, shining down upon a city poised unknowingly on the very brink of its final, irreversible ruin. From within the cavernous belly of the colossal wooden horse, a hidden panel quietly slid open. No creak, no telltale groan disturbed the stillness of the night. It was an opening skillfully concealed within the intricate carvings of the horse's flank, designed by the master craftsman Hippias. One by one, in disciplined silence, the most formidable warriors of the Greek army emerged. Their bronze armor gleamed faintly in the pale moonlight, and their faces were grim, etched with the tension of their perilous mission. Among the first to descend, agile and silent as shadows, was the brilliant Odysseus himself. Beside him, grim and determined, came Menelaus, whose stolen wife had ignited this long war. The powerful Dimes followed, his hand already on the hilt of his sword. Neoptolemus, the fierce young son of Achilles, descended with a quiet ferocity, eager to avenge his father's death and carve his own legend. There were others too, a select band of the bravest and most skilled, their numbers carefully chosen to remain concealed within the hollow structure. Their boots, carefully muffled, made no sound on the ancient cobblestones as they moved with practiced stealth. Their objective was clear and terrible: to open the main gates of Troy. At the same moment, on the sea, the main Greek fleet, which had feigned retreat, had quietly sailed back from behind the island of Tenedos. They navigated through the dark waters, their oars muffled, their lights extinguished. The sight of the massive fleet, ghostly shapes approaching the shore under the pale moon, must have filled the hearts of the hidden Greek warriors with a chilling anticipation, a silent testament to the unfolding betrayal. The hidden Greek warriors, having successfully reached the city gates, found their ally, Sinon, already at work. He had fulfilled his part of the treacherous bargain. He unlocked the immense bolts and drew back the heavy bars, releasing the very mechanisms that had for a decade defied the Greek siege. With a heavy, grinding sound that was mercifully drowned out by the lingering echoes of the earlier celebrations and the vastness of the sleeping city, the mighty gates of Troy slowly, inexorably swung open. They opened inwards, revealing a wide, fatal breach in the city's defenses. At the signal, whether a hidden torch flashed or a hushed horn was blown, the waiting Greek army poured through the open gates. They swarmed into the unsuspecting city like a rising tide, a vengeful flood. Their long-suppressed fury, born of 10 years of grinding warfare, now erupted with a terrible force. The initial peace of the night was shattered by the sudden, chilling sounds of war, the shouts of the invaders, the clash of weapons, and the first terrified screams of the awakening Trojans. The fall of Troy was not a battle, it was a massacre. The sleeping city awoke to utter chaos and unimaginable horror. Homes became battlegrounds, streets became rivers of blood. The Trojans, roused from their slumber, disoriented and bewildered, fought valiantly but futilely in the darkness. They were unprepared, outmaneuvered, and outnumbered by an enemy that had already infiltrated their very heart. The Greeks, fueled by vengeance, showed no mercy. They sacked the city with brutal efficiency, driven by years of frustration and the raw desire for retribution. The ancient sources recount numerous individual tragedies that unfolded during that horrifying night, each tale a testament to the war's ultimate cruelty. King Priam, the aged and venerable ruler of Troy, who had witnessed his city endure for so long, met a particularly brutal end. He had sought refuge at the altar of Zeus in his own palace courtyard, clinging to a sacred sanctuary, hoping for divine protection. But Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, driven by a fierce desire to prove himself and perhaps by a lingering ancestral hatred, showed no reverence for the old king's age or the sanctity of the altar. He dragged Priam from the holy ground and ruthlessly slew him, a final, ignoble act of violence that shattered the last vestiges of Troy's royal line. Queen Hecuba, Priam's wife, a figure of immense and enduring sorrow, watched in horror as her city burned and her family perished around her. She was a witness to the final, devastating destruction of everything she held dear. Her fate, like that of many Trojan women, was to be taken captive, destined for a life of slavery and humiliation among her enemies. Cassandra, the prophetic princess whose dire warnings had been tragically dismissed by her own people, endured a particularly cruel fate. She sought refuge in the temple of Athena, clinging desperately to the statue of the goddess, seeking sanctuary. But the lesser Ajax, a swift and often arrogant Greek warrior, showed no respect for the sacred space or for the terrified princess. He brutally dragged her from the altar, committing a sacrilegious act that would incur the fierce wrath of Athena and haunt the Greeks on their difficult return voyages. Cassandra, the prophetess of doom, was forced into slavery, her torment made worse by her unending, unheeded visions of future suffering. The fate of young Astyanax, Hector's infant son, was perhaps the most heart-wrenching of all. He was but a tender child, innocent of the war and its causes, yet his royal blood marked him for destruction. The Greeks, fearing that he might one day grow to avenge his father and rebuild Troy, condemned him to a brutal death. He was cruelly hurled from the towering walls of Troy, a desperate act of cruelty to ensure that no seed of future Trojan resistance could ever sprout. His innocent life was extinguished, a stark symbol of the utter devastation inflicted upon the city. The sacking of Troy was a cataclysmic event, a night of fire and blood that erased a powerful civilization from the face of the earth. The proud towers that had stood for centuries, defying every assault, now crumbled into smoking ruins. The magnificent temples, once filled with fervent prayers, were desecrated and looted. The streets, once bustling with life, were choked with the dead and the dying. The vast wealth of Troy, accumulated over generations of trade and conquest, was plundered, eagerly seized by the victorious Greeks. The women and children who survived the initial massacre were rounded up, destined to be distributed as slaves among the conquering heroes, their lives irrevocably shattered. The great city of Troy, a beacon of civilization in Asia Minor, was utterly destroyed, reduced to a smoldering ruin, its glory extinguished forever. The victorious Achaeans, their vengeance exacted and their plunder secured, believed their triumph was complete. They gathered their vast spoils, loaded their ships with the captured treasures and the enslaved survivors, and prepared for their long-awaited journey home. However, their triumph was short-lived, and their journey home, known as the nostoi, or returns, would prove to be far more arduous and tragic than their initial voyage to Troy. The Greeks had committed terrible acts during the sack of the city, not only against the Trojans but also against the sacred laws of the gods. Their hubris and sacrilege, particularly the violation of temples and the abuse of supplicants, had deeply offended the very deities who had once supported their cause. The divine retribution was swift and merciless. Athena, furious at the desecration of her temple and the outrage against Cassandra, turned her wrath against the returning Greek fleet. She appealed to Poseidon, the lord of the seas, to unleash his fury upon them. Storms of unimaginable violence arose from the depths of the Aegean. Winds howled, waves crashed with terrifying force, and lightning tore through the dark skies. Many ships were dashed against treacherous rocks, swallowed by the churning sea, or scattered far and wide across the vast, unforgiving expanse of the ocean. The fates of the returning Greek heroes were diverse and often tragic, a testament to the gods' displeasure and the lingering curse of the war. Agamemnon, the High King, who had led the entire expedition, managed to return to his kingdom of Mycenae. But his homecoming was not one of peace or celebration. During his long absence, his wife, Clytemnestra, had taken a lover, Aegisthus. She harbored a deep, burning resentment for Agamemnon, particularly for his unforgivable sacrifice of their daughter, Iphigenia, at Aulis. Upon his arrival, Agamemnon was brutally murdered by Clytemnestra and Aegisthus, his life ending not on the battlefield, but in his own bath, a stark and bloody betrayal. His death led to a long and tragic cycle of vengeance within his own family, fulfilling ancient curses. Menelaus, whose personal grievance had sparked the entire conflict, endured a long and arduous journey home. His ships were tossed by storms, driven far off course, and he spent many years wandering across distant lands, finally reunited with Helen only after much suffering. His journey became almost as legendary as the war itself. Perhaps the most famous and harrowing return was that of Odysseus, the cunning architect of the Trojan horse. His voyage home to Ithaca would last for another 10 long years, filled with incredible dangers, monstrous encounters, and profound challenges. He faced the wrath of Poseidon, who resented his role in Troy's destruction. He encountered the seductive Sirens, the monstrous Scylla and Charybdis, the beautiful sorceress Circe, and the vengeful Cyclops Polyphemus. When he finally returned to Ithaca, disguised as a beggar, he found his palace overrun by greedy suitors attempting to marry his loyal wife, Penelope, and seize his kingdom. His journey home, chronicled in Homer's Odyssey, became an epic in its own right, a tale of perseverance, intelligence, and a deep longing for hearth and home. The Trojan War, in its terrible grandeur and tragic sweep, left an indelible mark on the ancient world and, indeed, on the entire course of human civilization. It became more than just a historical event, it transformed into a foundational myth, a touchstone for understanding human nature, divine intervention, and the profound consequences of pride, passion, and vengeance. The vivid stories of its heroes and villains, its epic battles and its agonizing losses, were passed down through generations, shaping the very cultural identity of the Greeks. These tales became the bedrock of their literature, their art, and their philosophy. The heroic ideal, the concept of Cleo's undying glory achieved through noble deeds, became a central tenet of Greek culture, profoundly influenced by the examples of Achilles, Hector, and the other warriors who fought and died on the plains of Troy. The tragedies performed in ancient Athenian theaters frequently drew their inspiration from the events and characters of the Trojan War, exploring timeless themes of fate, justice, and suffering. Even beyond the Greek world, the story of Troy resonated deeply. The Romans, seeking a noble origin for their own burgeoning empire, claimed descent from the Trojan hero Aeneas, who, after the fall of his city, embarked on his own epic journey, eventually founding a new lineage in Italy, as recounted in Virgil's Aeneid. Thus, the legacy of Troy extended to become a cornerstone of Roman identity and imperial ambition, bridging two great civilizations through a shared narrative of heroic struggle and destiny. Archaeological discoveries in modern times, particularly the excavations at Hisarlik, in what is now Turkey, have revealed multiple layers of ancient cities, one built upon the ruins of another. These findings lend a powerful, tangible reality to the ancient legends, suggesting that while the poetic embellishments might be grand, a catastrophic destruction did indeed befall a thriving city in that region around the time of the presumed Trojan War. This blend of enduring myth and tantalizing archaeological evidence continues to fascinate scholars and storytellers alike. The Trojan War remains a powerful and enduring testament to the complex interplay of human ambition and divine will. It speaks of the fleeting nature of glory, the devastating cost of conflict, and the profound power of love, loyalty, and loss. It is a story that, even today, continues to captivate and instruct, quietly reminding us of the timeless struggles that define the human experience. As the dust settled on the plains of Troy, and the once mighty city faded into memory and ruin, the whispers of its epic tale began their slow, enduring journey through the ages, carried on the soft currents of history, reaching us still, even in our modern world, echoing the lessons of ancient sorrows and enduring triumphs. And so, our tale of Troy comes to a close. Thank you for listening, and for journeying with the restful historian through these ancient whispers. May your night be filled with peaceful slumber.